Welcome to Step by Step, a video Bible study series presented by the Monte Vista Church of Christ in Phoenix, Arizona.
It's no big secret that we are currently living in a culture where marriage is becoming more and more obsolete. I mean, think about it. Fewer people are getting married today. More people are deciding to cohabitate. They're deciding to live together without the benefits of marriage. Over 50% of all marriages end in divorce, and we're even living in a time where our government, our very government, has attempted to redefine marriage. They've attempted to redefine marriage to be between people of the same sex. This is the culture that we are currently living in today, and obviously these things that I have just listed are not the will of God. They are not what God intends for marriage. In fact, all of these things stand in direct conflict to God's will for marriage. And so what we want to do in this video is we just want to rehearse some truths that the Bible gives in regards to marriage, and many people in our society review these things I'm about to share with you as radical truths. They review them as truths that are out of step and outdated when it comes to our culture. But regardless of how people in our culture may view these things, the fact of the matter is these things I'm about to share with you, they're biblical. They come from the Bible. They come from God Himself. And so let's look at some radical truths when it comes to marriage. And the first truth we want to consider is the fact that when it comes to marriage, God created it. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. God created marriage. We as human beings did not create this very sacred institution. This is something that Jesus spoke on when He was on the earth preaching the Word of God in Matthew chapter 19. In Matthew chapter 19, beginning with verse number 4, after receiving a very controversial question from the Pharisees in regards to marriage and divorce, Jesus said in Matthew 19 and verse 4, "Have you not read that He who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And He said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh, what therefore God has joined together. Let no man separate." Here, particularly in verse number 4, we learn that when it comes to marriage, marriage is something that was created by God. It was created by Jesus. When answering this controversial question about marriage and divorce from the Pharisees, notice how Jesus takes them back to the beginning. He takes them back to the book of Genesis. He takes them back to God's original intent for marriage. He wants them to understand that when it comes to this institution, it is God's creation. It is God's institution, and because it is God's creation and institution, that means that He and only He has the right to set the rules for it. God and only God has the right to set the rules or the standard for marriage, and He certainly has done that. In fact, according to Jesus, one of God's rules or standard for marriage is that it is to be between one man and one woman. One man and one woman, not one man and one man, or one woman and one woman, or one man and two women, or one woman and three men. No, Jesus says it is to be between one man and one woman. Again, verse number 4, He who created them from the beginning made them male and female. Verse 5, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. A man shall be joined to his wife. Both of those are singular nouns. One man one woman. That's what Jesus says. So often when talking about marriage, so often people in our culture will say, well, Jesus never specifically condemned same-sex marriage. They'll say there is no verse from Jesus that says, thou shalt not have a man marry a man and a woman marry a woman. So often, instead of focusing on what Jesus has said, they try to focus on what he hasn't said. Notice how in these verses, Jesus says what he wants when it comes to marriage. He says he wants it to be between a man and a woman, one man and one woman. And so instead of focusing on what he hasn't said, let's focus on what he has said. Here, Jesus is clearly giving his standard for marriage. It is to be between a man and a woman. And then finally, notice how Jesus makes it clear it is to be between a man and a woman for a lifetime. For a lifetime. Again, verse 6. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. But therefore God has joined together. Let no man separate. Verse number 7. They said to him, why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away? He said to them, because of the hardness of your heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, he's going back to God's original intent for marriage. From the beginning, it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another commits adultery. Notice how, based on what these verses say, it is clearly not God's will that over 50% of all marriages in our society end in divorce. It is clearly not God's will for us as human beings who are married to be severing this relationship whenever we desire. While there is an exception provided in verse number 9, the main thing that really needs to be emphasized here is Jesus is talking about the permanency of marriage. In verse number 6, he makes it very clear that when a man and a woman marry, God makes them one. The idea of being one there means that God spiritually glues them together. God brings them together himself as one, and only he has the right or the authority to sever that relationship. Whenever we divorce, whenever we desire, whenever we violate God's standard for marriage and the permanency of marriage, what we do is we make a mess of things. We tear apart what God has put together, and Jesus says we don't have a right to do that. We don't have a right to tear apart what God has put together. Jesus says that God's original intent for marriage is to be one man and one woman for a lifetime. That's his way, and his way is always the best way. Now, these are just some truths that our society may view as radical when it comes to marriage. But they are God's truths. It's God's will, and let us, as his people, always strive to submit to his will when it comes to this sacred institution.
Thanks for watching. For more online Bible study material, or to find more episodes in this series, visit us on our website at montevista.church.